Today we're going to talk about Europe after the decline of Napoleon. All right, so how Europe fared in the decades following Napoleon's decline from power in 1815. What was going on in France, what was going on in Russia, other parts of Europe, and also what happened to Europe's colonies in the New World throughout the 1800s. All right, so one page of notes here today. We're going to be talking about Europe after Napoleon. So when Napoleon was removed from power in 1815, obviously something has to take his place as the governor or the ruler of France, okay? So a constitutional monarchy was established in France once Napoleon was withdrawn from power. So remember, think about that wheel of the French Revolution, how it went full circle. It started with an absolute monarchy with King Louis XVI. Then it kind of became a constitutional monarchy. Then it became a republic with the Jacobins. Then you had the Reign of Terror, which was kind of another dictator in Robespierre. Then he was taken out. It was made a republic again. And then Napoleon came to power, which was essentially another monarch. Right? So that wheel has already turned two full times for France, and now it is continuing to turn in another direction for constitutional monarchy. All right, and it will continue to move a lot of different new governments in France throughout the French Revolution and afterwards even. So a constitutional monarchy, that was established in France, and then in 1830, about 15 years after it was established, King Charles X of France tried to bring back absolute monarchy again. He said, okay, I'm not sure about this whole constitutional monarchy thing. We've been doing it for the past 15 years. Basically, I want more power, he said. I want to have as much power as Napoleon had. I want to have as much power as King Louis XVI had. I want to have as much power as King Louis XIV, the Sun King, had, all right? So King Charles X of France tried to bring back absolute monarchy again. Now, this was met with riots in the streets of Paris, okay? Parisians and other people in France, they said, no, anything but another absolute monarch, all right? We've had Louis XVI, we've had Robespierre, we've had Napoleon. We don't want another one, all right? So there were a lot of riots in the streets of Paris, and Charles was forced to flee the country because he was so unpopular, because people were not about to have another absolute ruler. So he fled the country and was replaced by a guy named Louis Philippe. Now, if you're familiar with the musical or the movie Les Miserables, really good movie. It's about this revolution here, this time in 1830, when King Charles the 10th tried to take more power, and the people wouldn't let that happen. That is the backdrop of this story, Les Miserables. It was a book by Victor Hugo, who lived in France in the 1800s, and then it became a really good musical. Then in 1848, the French people turned on King Louis Philippe, okay, the person who had taken power after Charles the 10th abdicated the throne and fled. And a mob in Paris overturned the monarchy. They said, okay, we're not going to even have a constitutional monarchy anymore. We've tried it for a while. Things aren't all that much better. We're going to have another revolution and overturn the monarchy and establish another republic, okay? Because things were good then, right, with the republic under the Jacobins. No, they weren't. So they wanted to continue to change the French government, said maybe this time it'll stick, this time it'll work, this will be the real revolution, a good one. But this government, once it was established, once King Louis Philippe was deposed and a republic was established, it began to fall apart immediately. Okay? You had radicals turning on each other, and this caused a lot of actual battles in the streets of Paris. Paris has one of the most violent histories of any city in the world, and this is one of the reasons, because they kept changing the government and kept turning on each other, really was just plunged into chaos, starting at the beginning of the French Revolution, going all the way throughout most of the 1800s, even still in 1848. Now, 1848 was a year with a lot of revolutions in Europe, and France's revolution here was just one of them. As a result of these battles taking place in Paris and the Republic government falling apart immediately, a moderate constitution was drawn up, and this called for a parliament and a strong president to be elected by the people. They said, hey, it's worked in America to have a president and a Congress. Maybe we can do that here. Because remember, all along, the French wanted to be like the Americans with the French Revolution. Obviously, it did not turn out that way because they had different goals. But they said, let's try again. Let's make another government. Okay, 10th time's the charm, right? Let's try again with a different constitution. Have a strong president elected by the people. So the person who won the French presidential election of 1848 was Louis Napoleon. Now, think back about the absolute rulers that they have overthrown. Okay, there was Louis the 16th, and then there was Napoleon. So they said, you know what'll cause real change is if we elect Louis Napoleon. Now, he was actually the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, and 4 years after becoming president of France, he took the title, yes, of emperor, okay, just like his uncle had done. He took the title of Emperor Napoleon III. So again, this wheel just keeps on turning, okay? The French government keeps changing. It went from monarchy to constitutional monarchy to republic to radical republic, back to a more moderate republic, then to another monarchy with Napoleon, then to a constitutional monarchy, then to a republic, then a new constitution. Now, with elections, we elect a president, and then he becomes an emperor, which is basically another dictatorship, another monarchy. Okay, just how crazy it would have been to live in France at this time. It's really unfathomable. So the French actually accepted this return to monarchy. They said, hey, I know it hasn't worked too well in the past, but neither has anything else. And they were weary of all the instability and said, you know what, at least with Napoleon, we had a short period of stability when he was ruling for the people and bringing in all those principles of the Enlightenment. So they said, you know what, we want a strong leader again, even if that person is an authoritarian monarch. We're going to roll the dice on this one. Hopefully this one turns out better than Louis and Napoleon and Robespierre did. And actually, surprisingly, very surprisingly to me, Louis Napoleon was actually a good emperor. Okay, a good dictator is very, very rare in history. Okay, almost all dictatorships have turned out horribly because the dictator becomes way too powerful and rules for himself instead of for the people. But Louis Napoleon was an exception. He was actually what we call a benevolent dictator. To be benevolent means to be good to your people. He ruled for his people. He built railroads, he built factories, he built public works programs, things to make his people's lives better. And because of these reforms, France's unemployment rate dropped for the first time in a really long time, and the country experienced real prosperity for the first time in decades. Remember, before the French Revolution, the French peasants were hungry and they were taxed too high. And the economy really hasn't bounced back since then, not until Emperor Louis Napoleon, who became known as Emperor Napoleon III. So this was really when France started to experience real prosperity. And by the way, that's the first photograph we've had on any of our slides. All right, so we're getting closer to the present day, you can see. Okay, now shifting gears here, going from France to Russia. If we were to describe Russia in the early 1800s, yes, it was at odds with France. It was on the side of Britain and Prussia and Austria because they were fighting Napoleon. But Russia was still very, very old-fashioned at this time. They had not really modernized at all, had not industrialized like other European powers, and they were really kind of falling behind. And Russia still also practiced serfdom. And remember that term serfdom, that is a type of feudalism. Now, when you think of feudalism, you think of the Middle Ages. Okay? You think of like the 1300s when feudalism was really big in Europe. But here in the 1800s, Russia still has it. They still have this very outdated economic process called feudalism, in which the serfs, or the peasants, were bound to the nobles whose land they worked. They could not rise out of that lower status, all right? Now, eventually, Russia's lack of industrial development and their archaic social structure became very obvious to the rest of the world. They said, what is up with this country, Russia? They're so big, they could be so powerful, but all of the other countries in Europe are modernizing, and they're just not. They're choosing not to. So it became very obvious to the rest of the world. And then came the Crimean War in the 1850s. The Crimean War, if you look on the map there, that small little, almost an island, kind of a peninsula called Crimea, this was invaded by the Russians. Okay? It was a part of the Holy Roman Empire at this time, but in 1853, Tsar Nicholas I of Russia tried to take over part of the empire in Crimea, this area on the map right there. Now, remember I said Russia had not really modernized at all by this time. They had not grown really economically or industrially. So, because of Russia's lack of transportation and military technology, this was a miserable failure for the Russians. They did not have uh, advanced and sophisticated weapons like the Ottoman Turks did and the countries who defended the Ottoman Turks. They were completely behind, they were ill prepared for this battle. They were kind of living in the wrong century. And so this was really a wake up call for the Russians. Okay, before this point, everywhere else in the world had become painfully aware of Russia's lack of advancement. And here, this was a wake up call for Russia. Okay, that is when they began to be aware that, okay, we need to do something about this. We need to get some new technology and advance industrially as a society. Now, as I said, a lot of European powers actually fought on the side of the Ottoman Turks. Now, if you think about it, why would countries like Britain, who is a Christian country, and Russia, who is a Christian country, why would they fight against each other where Britain fought for the Ottoman Turks, who is a Muslim country? Well, the reason why Britain defended the Ottoman Turks is because Russia was the aggressor. Okay? They were the ones who were starting the war and invading the area. The Ottomans were simply defending the territory that they already had. So you can see at this point in Europe after Napoleon, countries are very wary of people who try to take over land for the purpose of territorial expansion. They said, we don't want to do that anymore. Next person who does that, we're going to nip it in the bud. Okay, we're going to stop it immediately. That way we don't get another Napoleon on our hands. So the reason why Britain and other European powers backed up the Ottomans was in order to prevent Tsar Nicholas I of Russia from becoming another Napoleon. So after the war, Nicholas's son, who became Tsar Alexander II, he decided to move Russia forward, to move Russia toward modernization and social change. That way they can keep up with the rest of the world. So in 1861, very big deal here, he freed the serfs and ended serfdom. Finally, in Europe, serfdom was ended. Okay, this form of kind of indentured servitude had been stopped and abolished, and the serfs were freed. Then his son, 20 years later, in 1881, his son, Tsar Alexander III, encouraged industrial development to expand Russia's power. He then commissioned the building of what became known as the Trans-Siberian Railroad. This is one of the most impressive architectural feats in modern history. Okay, the Trans-Siberian Railroad crossed thousands and thousands of miles from St. Petersburg, Russia, all the way to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast, all across Russia. And you know how massive Russia is, all right? So the Trans-Siberian Railroad was built in 1891, several decades after the Transcontinental Railroad was built in the United States. And this connected Russia from east to west. And it was really, really good for Russia's economy and for their culture. Now, finally, what was going on in the New World at this time? What was going on in Latin America in the first 30 years of the 19th century? Well, a lot of Latin American nations heard about the American Revolution and how the colonies broke apart from their European mother country. And they heard about the French Revolution and how the French had at least tried to break apart from their ruler. And they said, why can't we have a revolution of our own and gain our independence? So a lot of Latin American nations, as you see in the picture there, they fought and won independence from European control. Now, just a few examples here. Haiti won independence from France. Now, this was a big deal because this was the first black colony to break free from European control. It was a colony almost entirely made up of former slaves, and they broke free from European control. Then Mexico and most of Central and South America, if you look on the top map there, all the area in the green, they broke apart from Spain. They declared independence from Spain. And then Brazil, in the yellow there, they declared independence and won independence from Portugal. All right, so you have all of this territory from 1800 to 1830. If you look at the map there, in 1800, places in Europe controlled all of Latin America, all of that area. But then by 1830, if you look at the bottom map, almost all of that territory won independence for itself. All the area in the light purple, those are the countries who had wars for independence and won independence for themselves and kicked out the Europeans from their territory. All right, so the area in the green used to be controlled by Spain. Area in the yellow used to be controlled by Portugal, and then the small area of Haiti used to be controlled by France, but then they lost it with the Haitian Revolt, as it's called. So by 1830, Europe had lost nearly all of the New World that they had once completely controlled. All right, so with that, kind of leads us up to where we're going to dive into a little bit more American history. Next class, to finish up this unit, what was going on in the United States during this time of the French Revolution and Napoleon, and even right afterwards, like we talked about today.